You're listening to the Served Up Show, a podcast that features inspiring beverage professionals and topic experts that share their passions through meaningful content. Your hostesses, Bridget Albert, is best known as the Market Fresh Mixologist, an industry mentor with over 25 years of experience. And I'm Julie Milroy, best known for my passion for leading change and helping others grow in their careers. Grab a cocktail and sit back. Let's learn how we can make a positive impact in our industry. Happy New Year, Served Up friends. Julie here. I am so excited to kick off the new year with Sarah Quider, Vice President of Winemaking at Foley Family Wine Estates. Sarah shares her journey and passion in the vineyards to the glass. Starting as a harvest intern at Ferrari Crono in 1995, Sarah made a full circle back in 2003 as assistant winemaker, quickly becoming winemaker and now leading all wine production at Foley Family Estates. Now sit back, grab your favorite glass of Ferrari Crono Sonoma Valley wine and get inspired.
Welcome to Served Up. We are so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here as well.
My goodness, you're so welcome. Could you tell our listeners a little bit of background about yourself and what brought you into the wine world?
Okay. It's funny because I've told this story a few times and I love this story because I kind of fell into the wine business. I was a biology major out of Sonoma State University in college. And my first job out of college was working for the Pacific States Marine Fisheries Commission. And I was a biologist assistant, and the biologist at the time was doing a Pacific rockfish study. And so the big draggers would go fishing all day, come to the docks, offload their haul. And the ladies on the fishing dock would sit there and fillet the fish and throw the fish carcass into a pile. And my job, believe it or not, it should have been on Mike Rowe's dirty job because it was pretty bad. I had gloves on. I would pick up these fish carcasses and I would take a hacksaw to the head of the rockfish, and I would take these ear bones out of the skull of the rockfish. And they're called otoliths, and they had rings like trees. So if these otoliths were getting smaller and smaller, our depletions were going down and we were depleting our resources in the ocean. But I would wear gloves and I would come home from work and I still smelled like fish on my hands. I would find a scale at dinner with my friends, like a little fish scale in my hair. And I'm like, oh my God, it was bad. I would come home and I was like, I didn't go to college to cut fish. And I was like, I can't do this another day. I opened the newspaper and I said, I'm quitting. The next day I went in and I quit. I opened the paper and Ferrari Crono Winery was hiring for their harvest intern, and it had already started. Harvest had already started and their intern had started and quit. And I walked in and I was replacing somebody that had already started. So it was like when I walked in at the winery, everything was already fermenting. Like there was apples and citrus and flowers and peaches and no fish smell anywhere. And I was like, oh my gosh, I just love the aromatics. And I realized that I am a very aromatic person. I'm always paying attention to what I smell and taste. But I realized at that moment in that interview that wine is really biology. It's yeast converting sugar to alcohol and bacteria converting malic acid to lactic acid. And I realized that there is the beautiful science part of winemaking, but also the very creative aspect of the aromatics and flavors. And at the end of the day, when I would come home from work at the winery, I would have a bottle of wine instead of scales in my hair. So that was it.
That's a major upgrade.
It was. And I have never looked back. And that was 28 years ago. That was my very first harvest. And I've loved every minute of it because I do believe the creative aspect, every vintage is different. And I feel like Mother Nature gives us different weather patterns, and it's never the same vintage. And it's always challenging. And I think you never get bored. I love it. Absolutely love it.
That's wonderful. I mean, even though we do still need the biologists, that will do the tough job of, with the stinky fish, I'm so glad that you discovered wine. So, tell us about that. So you go in as an intern, and what was that journey like for you to start as an intern at Ferrari Carano and now be head winemaker of Foley Family Wine Estates?
Okay. So from that point, I worked a harvest, and I was only contracted for 3 months. They ended up keeping me because I kept asking questions. I was curious and I was passionate. I was like, wow, this is amazing. I ended up working like a few years and then went to Jordan Winery. And when I went to work at Jordan Winery, it was really Rob Davis was my true mentor, because what he taught me as a mentor and as a winemaker, as I am today, is that he really instilled in me about consistency in a product. Jordan Cabernet is consistent, right? Jordan Cab. And so what he taught me is he taught me how to taste. I walked vineyards with him. I traveled internationally with him. He was my true mentor on how to be focused on a brand, talk about a consistent product, and being with Mother Nature, giving us all these different weather patterns, still being true to a consistent wine, so that you can, if you have followers that love your wine, you want it to be something that people come back to year after year after year. And that does resonate with a lot of people. Rob Davis was very funny because he is a true friend of mine. I'm having lunch with him tomorrow. But he's like, Sarah, you really need to go to Davis and get your degree in winemaking, because there's a lot more chemistry as in winemaking, along with biology. He goes, just go to Davis. It'll open more doors. You'll learn a little bit about these questions you keep asking me. And he's like, just go get your degree. So I did. I ended up leaving Jordan, got my degree. And at that point, once I graduated, I decided I needed to go back to Ferrari Carano and get a reference. And Rob gave me a reference, but I went back to Don and Rhonda Carano and George Bursick. And at that point at Ferrari Carano's history, they had just expanded to 2 wineries. So they had a white winery facility, which was the original estate winery that I had worked at, but they had built this red wine facility up in the mountains. And they were just at that point splitting the staff, and they needed help. And it was like perfect timing for me to graduate. And I came on board in 2003 as assistant winemaker. And at that point, I was working just on the white wines. And then there was a whole nother red winery facility separate. So what happened was I worked a few years with George as assistant winemaker. And after 3 years, I think George Bursick gave notice and he left and started his own consulting business. And at that point, I became the white winery winemaker. So in 2006, I was just making the Fumé Blanc and the Chardonnays and making the rosés and all the white wines. And there was a gentleman who made all the red wines. He gave notice in 2013. And at that point, I had moved over to oversee both the red and the white facilities with I had women winemakers. I had 2 women winemakers at the red winery and 2 women winemakers at the white winery. And Dawn and Rhonda had also purchased a Pinot Noir facility in Lazy Creek in Anderson Valley. And I had 2 winemakers that were women there. So it was like 7 of us, all winemakers that were all women. And it was such a great avenue, great experience, and a good team. And at that point, I did that for quite a few years until Don Carano had passed away. Bless his soul, because he was a very, very generous, very sweet man that I will always cherish forever. And once his passing, it was Rhonda and the children decided to sell. And that's when Bill Foley and Carol came on board, and they purchased Ferrari Carano in 2020. And at that point, they were looking for a vice president of winemaking for all of their facilities. So at that point, I let go of the reins of Ferrari Carano, which I still oversee a little bit, but now I oversee all the wines under the Foley family wines portfolio, which is from Walla Walla, Washington to Oregon, all the way through California, Napa, Sonoma, all the way down to Santa Barbara. I've got a lot of hats, but it's been, there's so many great winemakers, and it's a good winemaking team that I work with. And it feels like they're amazing. And I truly enjoy them. And I think they make my job easy.
That's really an incredible story. And I love, when you mentioned like that team of women that was, around you and that positive energy. Is that common in the wine industry?
I think it's becoming more common. I think women are doing all kinds of things more than they have in the past. I think there's more women doctors and pilots and lawyers. I think it's just part of our society as a whole. And I don't get me wrong. I think there's great men winemakers in our portfolio, and I cherish them, and they bring a different element. But it is, we had a really good team, all women at that point.
That's really wonderful. And it's lovely to hear. I mean, I just heard something about that too. Like, we need the men and the woman, right? But it's so lovely to hear a story where there's, just this big community of women, because you don't hear that often. And I like what you said about, just having that consistency in product, right? In your brand and your wine. So, that if you have a Ferrari Carano Fumé, you know what to expect from that Fumé. What are some ways that you manage that from your position of VP of winemaking, overseeing all these wineries that all have different styles, different varietals from different regions? Like, how do you kind of manage that, making sure that you guys are true to that profile that you're looking for? And are there, any words of wisdom on how you manage that with all the various estates?
I absolutely, there's a way. Mother Nature does give you different weather patterns. One year it's a little cool, one year it's a little warmer. And, but one of the things that I think that is the fundamental aspect of being consistent is having the same source of fruit. And so the Fumé Blanc, you have the same vineyards. The land holdings that Foley owns, like Lancaster Cabernet, we have our Lancaster Estate vineyards, Chalk Hill. There's the Chalk Hill Vineyard. Every site has their sourcing. And if you're consistent with the fruit sourcing and you make the wine consistently with our winemaking team, you will have a consistent product, even though you have Mother Nature throwing a little bit of a cooler year or a warmer year. You have those fundamentals, I think, are really what's most important.
Wine can be perceived as very complicated sometimes, right? To like the consumer, like, oh my goodness, there's so much to see here on the shelf. Do you have any tips for maybe some beginners in the wine world to just get that little feel intimidation when they walk into the liquor store?
It's funny because I had a very dear friend of mine that really looked at wine as, it's not this sophisticated, little snobby thing that wine sometimes people get intimidated by, or there's just so many choices. I feel like it's really what he said is like, it's just fermented grape juice. I mean, if you boil it down, it's like yeast and grape juice and you make wine. Yes, there's techniques and things like that you can do to make it better. But I would only recommend is just try and what you like. And I feel like there's a lot of different styles of wine out there on the market. And if you find something that you like, fantastic, buy it again. Absolutely buy it again, because most likely if you are a winery, most people do try to make a consistent product. I think that sometimes people do change with trends. There are trends that go in with winemaking, and people do change their wines a little bit. And if it does, try something new. Don't be afraid to try something new. And I am always, it's funny because, you like our Fumé Blanc and our Chardonnay, I always try something that I don't make because I want to try something new always.
Yeah, I can imagine, especially when you have so much at your fingertips, right? And all these great wines. Tell us about, throughout your incredible career, and, it sounds all wonderful, but I'm sure there were moments that were extremely difficult and challenging. I could never imagine what a career would be like as a winemaker. Could you tell us, a time that was just really challenging and how you overcame that as a winemaker responsible for bringing a product to life, right? I can imagine there's a lot of stress.
Two things came to my mind when you said that. And one of the things that came to first off was when Don Carano hired me as winemaker. I remember I was sitting in his office and he had said, I'm going to hire a woman to be a winemaker for my winery. And he goes, I can't believe I'm hiring a woman, and at that point, it was way back, right? But I think at that point, there are some people that really struggle with a woman running a company. And at that point, I said, oh my God, I am going to be the best one I can be. And I was determined to prove myself as a winemaker and so it's that obstacle that was set up that I just wanted to challenge it and say, no, I can do this. Absolutely, I can do it. And I was determined. The second one that came to my mind was the challenging years. Those always come to my mind of very weather patterns that are very difficult. Whether it's a very cool year like 2011 or the smoky year of 2020, those years as a winemaker, you have to, it's a very hard challenge to make a good, consistent product when you are given ingredients that aren't at the best. And so you have to take grapes that are not the best, and you have to make the best wine you possibly can. And that is where you learn, like in 2020, when we had the fires, we really looked at analysis and looked at numbers for guaiacol and smoke taint markers. We left 3,000 tons out on the vines. We didn't pick a lot of it. We sold thousands, hundreds of thousands of gallons on the bulk market because we didn't want to bottle anything that was smoky. Those years are very, very challenging, and that will always be. I think that's makes you a better winemaker when you learn from those events that happen and you just move forward.
I don't think that a lot of folks realize what it takes to make wine. It just kind of magically appears on the shelf, where there really is so much agriculture, right, that goes behind it, and so much history as well. Can you talk a bit about that, kind of what the process is of making wine?
Okay, so the grapes are grown in the vineyard. And I think that one of the things that we do right now, we're pruning the vineyards right now. And when you prune, you can prune to actually have a lot of fruit or a little bit of fruit, depending on the spurs or the buds that you leave. So it depends. You can change. There's so many things in winemaking that you can do to change the outcome of your wine. So if you leave all this fruit on the vines, you're going to have wine that's really thin and light. And that's what people talk about, crop loads. And, the lower the yields, the better the wine, but not necessarily. I think sometimes it goes into, if it's too light of a crop, then it gets into a vegetative state and it grows all the canopy, and not the vine doesn't focus its energy into the cluster. So finding that perfect balance of fruit to canopy, and they call it balance, and giving it the best sunlight, and the sunflex is what I call it. I like sunflex into the berries because it ripens the fruit without it being green or sunburned. And one of the things I think with like Cabernet, the stage of how it develops on the vine, it goes from bell pepper, then it goes to herbal, then it goes to like this bramble wild berry, then it goes to cherry, then it goes to like a plum, blackberry, and then to a prune and to a raisin. So when you pick your wine, if you pick at bell pepper stage, you're going to have bell pepper wine. If you're going to pick at cherry, you're going to get cherry wine. If you're going to get prunes, you're going to get pruny wine. So just the vineyard aspect of when you pick and how you farm the grapes will determine your wine, the foundation of the grape and the juice. Then in winemaking, there's so many things that you can do. Like in Sauvignon Blanc, the yeast that you use, if you have different pathways. So believe it or not, there's catalogs of yeast. Like you can get all these different types of yeast strains. There's Merlot yeast, there's Sauvignon Blanc yeast, there's Cabernet yeast, there's Chardonnay yeast. But for like Sauvignon Blanc, you can get a yeast that will take a pathway from bell peppers to lemon lime grapefruit. And so just the yeast, you can take the same juice and use a strain of yeast that will make it smell like bell peppers. So depending on the yeast strain that you use can make your wine different as well. And then if you use stainless steel or barrels, and then the barrels. Are you going to use American oak, French oak, Hungarian oak, light toast, heavy toast? Oh, there's so many parameters. And that's the creative part of winemaking is there's so many things that you can do to make your wines, the end product, what you want it to be. And that's the passion part of it that I love and the beauty of how unique each wine can be in the end. So
that is the most simplest way I've heard anybody describe how to make wine. It's like, everybody can do it, but I recognize how much work goes into that, but it's such a great explanation. So thank you for that. Could you talk a little bit? And I know 2020, that was just crazy, right? With the fires. And I know that's like the F word. We don't want to talk about that, when we're out in the vineyards, but it was just crazy to see how one vineyard and one estate didn't get touched. And like the neighboring estate was completely burnt up. Right. And I think that was really big in Sonoma. Could you talk a little about how that happens? How the fire just kind of sporadically went to different areas?
So we had the fires and a lightning storm that came through, and it was dry lightning, and it literally sparked all these little baby fires. And the wind, it came down to the wind. The wind you could not control the spread of the fire. And there were so many different fires, the lightning complex. There were so many different fires that there was not enough manpower to handle it. So depending on what direction the wind was going is where the fire went or didn't go. That's why some vineyards were fine and some were not. I think as an industry, it was one of the most difficult vintages. I know that we ended up sending out for analysis smoke taint markers on all grapes before we made a decision to pick. And then everybody else did the same thing. Every winery, so the labs, these outside labs that actually could do this technology of testing the grapes, they were like, at first they were like, 3 days turnaround time. It ended up they got inundated with so many samples that it was a month out for analysis. And you needed to make decisions in picking, and you couldn't even depend on the outside labs anymore. So we ended up as Foley. We purchased the same equipment. We can do all our internal testing now because we still are going to have fires. We still want to know, do we pick and spend the labor and the money to pick, or do we not take an insurance claim? So at this point, we have an in-house GC mass spec that does all our smoke taint analysis. And it is fabulous to be able to have that technology in-house to make some decisions quicker. And it's interesting because that year, the white wines are fine. I think the white wines turned out okay because the smoke molecules actually went on the skins, and you press it really quick and just the juice came out, and the wines were fine. It was when you ferment on the skins with the red grapes, that smoke molecule just comes out of solution. And you had wines that just almost like bologna or smoked salmon or ashtray. There's a bitter tannin that comes through on the smoky wines. We tried our very best blocks, and like the reserve wines that you always try. It's like, oh, at least can we try a little bit? We tried to make wine, and the minute it started in the crusher to simmer, we knew. We're like, yep, it's smoky, because it just aromatically came out so quick.
And not the cool, like smoky cocktail trend that's going on. We couldn't go that route, right? With the smokiness.
Well, you know, what's interesting that you say that is because we have actually purchased some wines recently. Because what I try to do with the winemakers is I always try to do competitive sets. There are some wineries and companies that did bottle up some wines, and we did a lineup of wines of smoky 2020 wines. And what I found is some winemakers are more sensitive to others. We all have genetic chemical markers chemical receptors in our palates that some people are more sensitive to smoke and some people aren't. And I think there are wines out there that you can that handled the smoke better than others, depending on the varietal. We found that like Petit Verdot and Pinot Noir and Sangiovese and Syrah generally have a higher affinity for smoke pickup, where Cabernet isn't so bad. So depending on the varietal too, that changes it. So
I think it's super interesting. You know, I'm definitely from the cocktail world, more the spirit world. So as we're talking, I'm definitely, learning. And with that, I would love to get your perspective on, what you love most about the wine culture as an industry.
I think what I love is the aromatics and the sensory aspect of it, just because, on a side note, I collect gin. You're talking about your cocktails. I am a fanatic about gins and all the botanicals, and they're so different and unique. And I think I love food and wine. And when it comes to the end of the day, having a meal with your family and friends with a glass of wine or a bottle of wine with a wonderful meal, that lifestyle of enjoying life. And I think that's what I love most about this industry, is that connection of people with food and wine and good times. And, I think that is the best thing about it. There's nothing, because we're all, going through this world and hot, crazy, work, harvest, all this stuff. But when you sit down and you have a meal with family and friends with a glass of wine, there's nothing better.
Couldn't agree more. So talk to us. I'm really curious, because I know that this vintage, I had promised Angie that we weren't going to bug you until after harvest to get you on. So we gave you plenty of time to get through harvest. But my understanding was harvest was very early this year. Could you talk to us a little bit about, how 22 was and what we can expect in the wines from 2022?
Okay. So 2022, we had the most amazing growing season. It was mild and easy. And so it was like spring was great. Summer was great. It just was like, I remember giving a presentation to my boss, and it was like, yeah, oh my God, it's like, this is going to be an amazing harvest, because it's like ideal growing season. And then wham, we got hit with the Labor Day heat spike. And that Labor Day heat spike wasn't just Labor Day. If you look at the graphs, there's always a Labor Day heat spike. But this one lasted like Labor Day week spike, right? Or the heat dome. So we had quite an extensive heat event that came through that really kind of pushed things along. Most of the whites at that point, it was an early harvest. So a lot of the whites, Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnays were already if not scheduled. And it just shifted everything. We saw the heat spike coming, and we saw how long the heat event was going to last. So we started picking early, because you can only, bring in so much fruit a day. So we ended up shifting everything, and then we just kept going. So for about 5 weeks during that week before the heat spike, a week, and then a few weeks after, we just kept bringing everything in. And So it was early. We already bottled our Fumé Blanc already. And it's shocking because it came in early. We fermented it, we blended it, and we got it ready. And so the red wines, I think some of the things about the red wines, we wanted a little bit more hang time, and we just, you had to pick it because it was some of that dehydration. There was a little bit less fruit. And so we did get some of that, but I think you still had to pick with dehydrated fruit because you didn't want to lose the fruit. You watered as much as you could. But there were some vineyards that water wasn't as big of an issue. It's more of the row direction. Some vineyards were like out there in the sun and like, you need to pick those sooner than the ones that were protected more with a different canopy. So we had to really focus on doing what has to come off, what needs to come off, and what can wait. And so we kind of waited. The stuff that waited, I think, tended to be, in my opinion, a little bit better because it had that hang time that you really wanted for red wines. And luckily we did have quite a bit of wine that wasn't ready. And that was, we could do that. So it wasn't fine. There were, you just kind of made it through. So some of it you picked because you had to, and some of it you had more time overall. So looking forward to it. And the yields are down. And to me, when you have a little dehydration, it's really the water evaporating. So you get that concentrated flavor. And to me as a winemaker, that tends to be a little nice. I like it because it's got flavor. The vineyard managers don't like it because they lost fruit. So.
Oh my goodness. In your experience, can you share with our listeners what are some of your more like surprising wine and food pairings?
Oh gosh. See, sometimes there's always the classic, the food and wine pairings that are always like the Sauterne and the blue cheese and the champagne and caviar. And I think that there's so many in the classic pairings. I think right now I've been on a kick of bubbles and champagne that I've been drinking a lot. I don't know why, just for some reason, I can't get enough. And I'm always like, what can I pair with it now? It's like, and I do a lot of oysters. I love oysters and champagne and Chablis, oysters and Chablis. That's amazing pairing that I love. And now that it's becoming winter, it's more the Pinot Noirs and some of the red wines, the red blends that I like with the heartier stews and the steaks. I got a sous vide recently, and I just did my first sous vide and paired it with some beautiful cab. So just, kind of cooking in that respect of always challenging. I tend to do these fun cooking dinners that one night I'm doing I'll do Germany. Or I'll do Japan, and then and like everything from appetizer, salad, and entree. I'll do a whole evening, and then I try to get some of the wines. And I do it for fun, just because I like to cook. I love to cook, and I like the different flavors. So I always try to mix it up with also getting some of the wines that would pair with that kind of meal.
I love that. I always say, why stick to just one wine? Have many, right? So that you can play around with all the different flavors. I always say, I always have like my go-to everyday wine that if I need a glass of wine, it's my go-to for you. And I know you try to expand outside of your portfolio, but and I do understand that, there's seasons for wine and what you feel like. What is your go-to wine now? I know you just said bubblies and champagne. Is that it? Or is there something else that's kind of your everyday wine?
So the champagne has been my everyday wine lately. But what I'd love to do recently is I will pick a wine region. Like I just picked Cornice in France. And it was like, I don't know anything about this wine region. I am going to buy 6 bottles from this wine region, and I will take it and I will do a taste testing. And I will try to learn about that area and then taste wines of that area. And so that's one of the things I've been trying to do is really expand I'm always trying to learn more about wine, but also the region and the growing and the wineries, and always trying to learn. I do this with my kids, my poor kids. I'm like, oh, you like sodas, Coca-Cola? Okay, let's do a taste test. And I do everything blind. I make them taste I've done it with mustard. I've done it with like ketchup, anything we do. And it's always a taste test. And they're like, Mom, can't we just have it? But it's more about, sometimes it's about challenging your palate and your preconceived, what you think is your best, your favorite Coca-Cola, or you always challenge yourself, because what you think is going to be best may not be your favorite. So,
yeah, I love that. I think kind of picking a wine region, and I think going back to Bridget's question too, is like, for somebody that's a new wine drinker, like just pick one region, right? If you start in America, with American wine, there's so many, and like Willamette Valley or Sonoma, and picking a few wines from there and just really learning it. Cause it really is about place, right? And where that wine is from.
Yeah. And then I really like to take, like Chenin Blanc, take Chenin Blancs for one from every great growing region of the world, and seeing how different they are, because they're very like Pinot Noir from a Willamette versus Santa Barbara versus Sonoma County. They're very different Pinot Noirs. So very different in their acid structure, their alcohol levels. It just might change that. Oh, wait, I do like Willamette Pinot Noirs better than Sonoma County or whatever. Just because you're being forced to taste them side by side, you learn.
That's some really good advice. You just mentioned your children, and Julie and I saw Julie's eyes like lit up. Julie and I are both mothers as well. And we talk about our children very often on this show. And, in your experience, what has it been like being a mom and balancing a career within the wine industry?
It's funny. My son, who's 25 years old, works at Prairie Chrono. I mean, he grew up in the vineyards and at the winery, and he's he's working in the cellar, and he had to run in the vineyard today at one of the ranches that he goes, Mom, I went to the vineyard name was Keegan. I go, I had to drop something off at Keegan. He goes, I learned how to drive my car at that ranch. I would take my kids driving through the vineyard. And that's the ranch where he learned how to drive a car in. And it's so funny because you think of how you balance it. It's like, I went to the vineyard to go taste the wine, but here we're going to learn how to drive that car in a vineyard. So I did both. I managed it. It was pretty funny. That. Yeah, that was just today. I was like, oh, yeah, you did learn that.
That's great. I think, all these little things as we think it's managing, it's really these memorable moments for the kids, right? To be able to have that kind of access and the experience is just so special.
Yeah, it's not always easy. I think that, I was a mother of two, and, and winery, particularly at Harvest, you work 2 months straight. You don't have a day off. There's only one, you get one shot a year to make wine, and it's at Harvest, and you got to make all those decisions, and you need help. You can't be a parent. Like my daughter's birthday is September 15th, smack dab, not planned, obviously, but every year we celebrated her birthday on August 15th before Harvest started. So I always, to this day, I still celebrate her birthday on August 15th and September 15th, because I actually can sit down and have, dinner with her on August 15th and actually get to celebrate. So it's those little concessions that you give.
I think it's super cool that your son is now like following in your shoes a bit, Mom. That's really neat.
It's pretty fun because, it is a good industry. It's a fun industry. You have fun making wine. I think it's a great there's a lot of joy in the end product when, my son loves our wines and he's like, oh, I love the Sienna, like our Sienna Sangiovese Malbec line. He loves it. It's his favorite wine. And so there's certain wines that he's, at the beginning, they didn't like wine, but they've grown up to cherish and understand that wine is not something to go get drunk on, but actually to really enjoy the aromatics, the flavors, and the food and wine pairing that goes along with it.
Yeah, I love the Sienna too. So we have similar palates. It's such a great wine. So what's next for you and for Foley family going into 2023 now that you've wrapped up, harvest for 2022 and bottling? What's next? What can we all expect and look forward to?
Well, I think what I have loved about Bill and Carol and Courtney and Rob and Lindsay, the family of the Foleys, is that they have this tremendous passion for the wine business as well as the hospitality. So they have hotels, restaurants, they have wineries. And what I look forward to is, since I've been an employee with them, they have acquired Chateau St. Jean in Sonoma, and they've also just acquired Silverado just a few months ago in Napa. And they will continue to purchase because they are an acquisition company or family that they love opportunities to put jewels in their crown or whatever. I think it's really neat. Courtney calls it we're like little boats in a fleet. Like each winery is a boat, but we're all going in the same direction of a fleet. But we're all, they're very unique. So all of our wineries within the company, like Chalk Hill and Lancaster and Maris and Silverado and Ferrari Crono and Acrobat, all these little wineries that they own, they're all just little jewels in a crown. And I think they're going to just keep putting those jewels in there.
Yeah.
So I look forward to that moving forward and learning and growing with the company.
Let's talk about that for a second, because, with the acquisition of Ferrari Crono, which was, big news and really great, because I think having been somebody that's sold Ferrari Crono for many years since the beginning of my career and understanding the brand, it was just, it was already doing amazing things, and under your leadership and having the Foley family bring it under their wings continues to grow. But with the acquisition of Chateau St. Jean, right? This is a brand that's gone really big and wasn't even producing at the estate. So from what I hear, through the telephone line, is that Bill's focus is actually purchasing, wineries, not just for the brand, but for the actual estate and having that heritage and bringing that heritage back. I was recently at Chalone, which was incredible, and learning all the history about that. And that was kind of a similar situation, right? Like Chalone had this amazing history, and then it kind of went down the commercial mainstream, and it was just flooded and making cases from, juice from all over. And now going back to the roots of the winery and really producing some incredible wine. And Chateau St. Jean, I hear, had its first harvest at the winery. So share a little bit about what's going on there.
Chateau St. Jean. Yeah. So Treasury Wine Estates had it for quite a few years. And, Margot has been the winemaker, and I adore Margot. But they did take the production of all of Chateau St. Jean's wines over to Beringer, and they consolidated their winemaking facilities. We came in and we purchased a Chateau St. Jean. It hadn't been operational for 6 years. And this harvest was the first harvest in 6 years that we made wine there. And it was amazing. So yeah, we're not making the California wine tier anymore. They had a California Chardonnay and a California other wines. We are eliminating that, and we're bringing it back to just Sonoma County and focusing on the Saint Cepage and the Knights Valley and the Carneros Chardonnay, really focusing on smaller production, but also revamping it, bringing it back to what it used to be, and really trying to make the best wine we possibly can. I know we had a dinner with all the neighbors at the Chateau St. Jean, Sonoma, Kenwood area. And it was so funny because wine, one of the byproducts of wine is the pumice, so at harvest, we always have a pumice pile and you kind of compost it. Well, the neighbors could smell it. And I always think it smells like vinegar because it's just old, it's just sitting there. The neighbors were like, yay, we get to smell that again. And we were like, we're so sorry. And they're like, no, we love it. That there's that smell of winemaking in the neighborhood. And it just meant so much to me that even the neighbors love the trucks and the smells and the activity back at the winery. And I think it's going to be great. Nikki Williams is the winemaker, and she is so passionate and loves what she's doing there. And she basically rolled up her sleeves and it's like, okay, we got this. We're going to try to make wine. And yeah, not everything was perfect this year. And we knew it wouldn't because, there's gaskets and seals and pumps and things that just, went wrong. But we got through it and it'll only get better. I mean, to me, we thought about it. This was the worst of the worst is the first year. Now we have a list of things that we're going to do to make better. And that'll be this next harvest. We have 7 months before harvest. So we got to do it again.
Yeah. That's amazing.
My goodness. I know Julie and I have enjoyed our time so much with you, Sarah. Thank you so much for giving us, just some of the magic of what you and your team does. This was incredibly special. Mm-hmm. And on behalf of the Served Up family, I just want to thank you for being on the show and wish you some great health and a whole lot of peace.
Oh, thank you so much. And I appreciate you having me. I mean, you have a lot of choices of people out there, and I appreciate you having me and to talk about Forey Carano and all of Foley family wines. There's a lot of them there. So I hope you enjoy it over the holidays. Please look forward to some of that, just because I do feel that some of the wines that we make are just absolutely stunning. And so I hope you enjoy them.
And I couldn't agree with you more. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you, Sarah.
All right. Thanks, Julie, Bridget.
Thanks for listening. Served Up is brought to you by Southern Glazers Wine and Spirits. Produced by Zunu.online. Music by We Killed the Lion can be found on Spotify. Make sure to subscribe to be notified of future Served Up episodes. Cheers!